Hi, this is Roman Iqbal. I'm the legal director of CAIR-Columbus. I have with me Jennifer Nimmer. She's the director of our Columbus office. And we wanted to speak to you guys about the ban and the enforcement order that came out yesterday from the DHS. So I'm going to speak first about the ban. As you guys know, that there was an injunction on the ban, and the Justice Department attorneys told the court that there will be a new executive order coming on the Muslim ban. The status now is that we don't know when the new executive order will come out. There have been news reports that the new executive order on the travel ban issue should come out either next week or maybe later. We just don't know. Now, what we should be cautious here is that we should not believe in rumors which are flying around on the internet, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, because we don't know when and what the executive order, the new executive order would say. Now, we have an idea in general about what the new executive order would say. There's an expectation that the 7 countries which were in the original ban, that these 7 countries will be on the in the new executive order as well. In addition to that, we don't really know what the new executive order would say. There's another expectation that the green card holders and people who are dual citizens will not be a part of the new travel ban. In addition to that, we just don't know. And as I said, there are a lot of rumors flying around on the internet. I think we should be very careful in believing what you read on the internet, because the reality is nobody knows what will be covered in the new executive order. We just have to wait and see. As I said, we do know green card holders will be exempted, dual citizens will be exempted. In addition to that, nobody really knows. So let's just wait till next week and see what happens whenever the new executive order comes out.
Hi everybody, it's Jennifer Nimmer, the Executive Director for the Columbus office. I'm also the other attorney here. And as Roman said, we don't have the information yet on the revised version of the Muslim ban. That will be probably coming out next week, but what we do want to say is that it's at this point, even though we expect green card holders to be exempt, it's still a little dangerous or unsure if you travel at this point with a green card. You'll probably be okay based on what we've heard, but to be safe, if you're traveling, you should try to get back this weekend. If you are planning to go somewhere, you would want to delay that as long as you can until we see exactly what's going to happen. So traveling is still pretty iffy at this point. And we will update you obviously next week when the new version comes out, but what we've heard so far is it's substantially, essentially the same with a few minor modifications that won't really resolve the issues. But what we wanted to take the time to talk to you about today was the other executive orders that were signed in January that related to border security and immigration enforcement. So obviously this has been a very hot topic. There's been a lot of rumors. Last week the AP released a story that like 100,000 National Guard were going to be performing immigration roundups. That has not been verified and is actually not in the final version of the memo that was signed. So we wanted to take some time just to go over what actually has been implemented and what is happening so people actually know what's going on rather than conflicting news reports and what they hear on the internet. So basically, the orders were signed in January, and on February 20th, the DHS secretary signed memos that basically are instructions for how to implement the executive orders. So these are the instructions for how they're going to change how they are deporting people, detaining people, and what is happening on that front. And again, the overall message, as with the Muslim ban, is basically that immigrants are not welcome here, immigrants are dangerous, immigrants are criminals, and basically have no place in American society. That's the overall idea. And so it's obviously very concerning to us, even though this executive order may not affect our community as much as the Muslim ban. It's obviously something that we should still be concerned about from a humanitarian perspective, and also just from a perspective of this overarching theme of discrimination against immigrants. So sometimes people say, why should we care if undocumented immigrants are going to get deported? And I think people don't understand sometimes that for example, the detention centers that people are held in before they're deported are extremely inhumane. The conditions there are very bad. They're often denied medical treatment. People are held in cells that are overcrowded. They're over the capacity. Children are held there without basic provisions like blankets. So, for example, some of the detention centers are extremely cold and they refuse to even give blankets. So, extremely inhumane conditions, and not something that we want more of, which the memos will require more detention centers. Based on the instructions, they would have to build more detention centers, which is obviously not something that we want to have.
You know, one of the other things in the directive, the enforcement directive from yesterday, is that they authorize a hiring of 10,000 ICE agents, 5,000 CBP patrol agents, and in addition support staff, and there's no limit on the support and legal staff. So they could be potentially be hiring over 20,000 people. Now, this is something which is in the directive, which authorizes the government to do, but it's not, they don't have money. The money has to come from Congress. So if you don't agree that they should be this very large, what looks like to be a deportation force, you can certainly put pressure on Congress to not finance the hiring of additional 15,000 people and maybe a couple of more thousand support staff, because these are the people who would be used to carry mass raids to deport people who are here on an undocumented basis. The other issue, Jennifer, did you notice that in the directive they talked about the expedited removal?
Right. So I was going to go through some portions of the memo in a very general sense, because it's very technical and very confusing, even for people who are attorneys. But I'll go through some of the provisions that are extremely concerning. But obviously, one thing is that these immigration ICE raids are happening all over, and a lot of people are saying that, oh, you're being hysterical, this isn't really happening, this is just an exaggeration. But the memo confirms that basically anyone who is undocumented is a priority for removal now. So it doesn't matter if they are criminals or not. Doesn't matter if it's a mother of U.S. citizen children or if it is a child. They are all priorities for removal. And we'll talk about some of the specifics. But again, the issue is a humanitarian issue, that we should prioritize criminals. There's simply no reason to spend resources deporting people who are not actually a threat. For example, yesterday there was a Mexican man who was deported and immediately committed suicide. So he jumped off a bridge the minute he was deported. I mean, this is a serious issue. People are being deported even if they are at risk in their country of origin. Yesterday there was a woman in Texas who was found in a detention center. She has a brain tumor, and they returned her to the detention center instead of getting her treatment. I personally had a client once that was in detention in Arizona for 10 months and could not get any medical care. So again, just horrible conditions in some of these detention centers. But going through the actual memo, just to talk about some of the facts versus the news and the rumors. So last week, the leaked memo had provided for National Guard forces to be employed to enforce immigration law. So probably the only thing that is somewhat positive about the actual signed memo is that that portion was not in there, although there's still some vague language that indicates that they could use the National Guard if they decided to, but it doesn't specifically say that anymore. So the first memo basically just directs the Department of Homeland Security to enforce immigration laws against all removable aliens, and that means anyone undocumented basically, and will no longer exempt classes or categories of removable aliens from potential enforcement. So again, this is just the priority, basically making this a provision that anybody they can catch should be removed.
And the only two exceptions in the new order is DACA and DAPA, which is basically that if you were a dreamer and you came here as a child, so that exemption continues. And the other one is that if you are parents of U.S. citizens at least the enforcement directive does say that those two categories would be exempted. All the other categories of priority by the Obama administration, they have all been rescinded, so everybody's a target. So even though the order says that they will focus on criminals, but the reality is that the order clearly says that except for these two, DACA and DAPA, all the other priorities are rescinded, so everybody is a target now.
Right. So DAPA and DACA are specifically exempted for now, but there are pretty credible rumors that those are going to be at risk in the near future also.
In fact, I believe the order says that they will be coming up with another directive on DACA and DAPA, meaning they're not safe because there's another directive coming.
Another thing the memo does is expand acts that constitute chargeable criminal offenses. So now even minor things, maybe including even traffic violations, can be considered deportable offenses and put those people at a top priority for removal.
Including people who have taken public benefits or engaged in any lie to which all people who are undocumented here would have lied about at least the immigration status. Right.
So effective immediately, the priority enforcement program that was created under President Obama is rescinded, and the prior controversial Secure Communities program has been restored. And basically that will authorize removal without hearings for certain classes of people who've committed felonies, and that will be used in all eligible cases. We'll talk about expedited removal in a little bit. That's actually in the other memo. But expedited removal has been significantly expanded, which means that more people are going to be removed without access to a lawyer or an immigration judge, and will be removed as soon as within 24 hours.
Right, and that's important to understand again, the expedited removal. What used to be is that if you came via ocean and you were here within 100 miles of the border and within 2 weeks of arriving in America, that you could be subject to expedited removal. You would know, as Jennifer said, you won't have a judge, you won't have a lawyer, but now this directive allows the Secretary of DHS Secretary to expand this to possibly the whole country.
Right, so we'll talk about that in the context of the other memo. This memo also talks about 287G agreements, which means a contract between local law enforcement agencies and ICE, which it already exists currently, but right now there's only 32 law enforcement agencies in 16 states that participate in this. And this memo directs both ICE and CBP, which is the Customs and Border Patrol, to enter into agreements with any local law enforcement agencies that will agree, basically. And that is in order for them to have local law enforcement participate in enforcing immigration law, which is extremely problematic because it takes away resources, first of all, from regular criminal issues that the local law enforcement agencies are supposed to be working on. But also, in the past, these agreements have been very problematic because of the high amount of racial profiling. So basically just authorizes racial profiling by local law enforcement officers who are not really properly trained to enforce immigration law in the first place. But what's concerning is that this expands it, like I said, to also include Customs and Border Patrol, which before these agreements were only with ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Those are the people that actually round up people and deport them.
The other problem with this expansion is that if your local law enforcement gets into a contract with ICE, which deputizes them to act as ICE and to detain, arrest, one of the biggest issues is that safety risk. So if you're an undocumented person in America, right, and you could be a victim, or you could be of an attack, for example, and if you're undocumented and you're a victim, now you can't call the police. Because if you call the police and your jurisdiction has a contract with ICE, they can actually detain and arrest you. We don't know who else would it be expanded to. Would that be expanded to firefighters? Because these are essential safety services which you need. You need people who are victims. Even if they're undocumented, you need them to call the police. Because that is a safety risk not just to them, but to everybody in that community. So that is a great concern that this would deter people from engaging with law enforcement, which would make all of us unsafe.
Right. So, and again, this was this 287G has been highly criticized in the past, and because of the instance of racial profiling. So to bring back something and actually expand it when there's already been a big push to do away with it entirely, again, is just part of this theme of making immigrants feel like they are criminals, and that they're unwelcome, and that they're going to be targeted. Another thing the memo does is limits prosecutorial discretion. So, again, this is kind of a technical area, but basically prosecutors previously had a lot of discretion as far as who they would institute removal proceedings against, and they would use that discretion to prioritize. So, for example, maybe not the mother of some young U.S. citizen children. Her case would be kind of put on the back burner, and other people would be prioritized. And again, that limits this because everyone is seen as a priority. The other thing the memo does, oops, sorry about that, authorizes the hiring of 10,000 additional ICE agents and 5,000 CBP agents. So again, more of this kind of military state type of feeling.
And unlimited support staff and legal staff, so it could
Right.
potentially be over 25,000 new people.
And using a substantial amount of resources and money to accomplish that.
And that is, as I said earlier, something that Congress plays a part now, because obviously the money has to come from Congress. So that is something that if you don't agree with, is something to write to your congressperson about.
Right. And we'll talk about some of the things you can do at the end as far as how you can oppose some of these policies. The second memo on border security and immigration enforcement improvements provides for expanded detention. We mentioned this already, but basically a massive expansion in detention of removable immigrants. So basically almost anybody is going to be required to be detained. And again, the problem with that is the inhumane conditions, and also the fact that we don't even have the capacity to detain all these people. So we are already way over the capacity in most of these detention centers. So what would happen is new centers have to be built, which will be privatized, and again, this is kind of a way for private companies to profit, and also to not have to comply with basic humanitarian provisions as far as medical care, access to attorneys, etc. So certainly not a good thing for our country that we're going to be spending billions of dollars to build more detention centers that are just going to be completely inhumane. It modifies the requirements for applying for asylum. I'm not going to get into all the technical details, but it basically makes it much harder to claim asylum, provides for detention of asylum applicants until they are found to have a credible fear by an asylum officer or an immigration judge. And again, we don't have enough space to detain all these people, and they really haven't detailed a reasonable plan for how they are going to accomplish this.
And you know, one of the problems with the new directive is that if you do it at the border, at the airport, then they can just detain you, and then you have to wait for a long time till there's an adjudication on your asylum petition. But for that time period, you still have to be detained, and you can't get out, which is a serious problem. Right.
So the second memo also talks again about expanding the 287G agreements, which are providing for local law enforcement to get involved. And the language that leaves it kind of open to interpretation as to whether or not they're intending to use the National Guard. This memo, as signed, removed the language that actually mentioned using the National Guard, but it does still say that other state forces can be used to carry out immigration enforcement. So in relation to those 287G agreements that would provide for local law enforcement, the language seems to be vague enough that the National Guard could be considered a state force that could be used. And again, when the unofficial draft came out mentioning the National Guard and it was spread all over the media, there were conflicting reports about whether or not that had actually been seriously considered. But it's extremely alarming that it's even being talked about. I mean, they did admit that it was discussed.
I mean, there's a concern that the language has been deliberately kept vague to allow that, and that's certainly the concern here.
Right. So this memo also directs for the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of the wall, the infamous wall that we've all heard about many times, and for that construction to begin immediately. Of course, DHS would need a significant amount of additional funding for that, and there still doesn't seem to be a clear plan where that would come from. And the estimated cost is about $21 billion to build an additional 1,250 miles of fence and other types of physical barriers by 2020.
But again, the directive allows for that, but the appropriation has to come from Congress.
Right. Now, one of the areas we're most concerned about, and if you take anything away from this today, I hope that you will share this part with people who may be affected. The expedited removal process is significantly expanded, meaning that people can be deported, sometimes as quickly as within 24 hours, and without having a hearing before an immigration judge, without having the opportunity to consult with an attorney. And so obviously this is a seriously concerning provision, not something that we want to be expanded, and was previously only applicable to people that were picked up within 100 miles of the border and within 14 days of entry. And now it's been expanded to 2 years and is available nationwide. So anyone who is undocumented should see an attorney immediately to understand their situation and know whether or not they have any possible means of getting legal status here.
And you know, that's really important for people who come from Latin America. I mean, they're gangs, they're you know, there's sex crime. There are a lot of people who are here who could be eligible for asylum. So they need to immediately consult with a lawyer and make sure that gangs, sex violence, and all the issues that people have from that part of the world, that they should check with a lawyer, make sure that they are eligible for asylum, because if that is the case, that's an option certainly they should look into.
Right. So making sure that any undocumented immigrant at this point meets with an immigration attorney and keeps an immigration. Sorry, I'm going to open the window. It's really hot in here. Keeps an immigration attorney's card on hand at all times, and also making sure that friends and family have the name and phone number of that immigration attorney, because again, with expedited removal, things can happen as quickly as 24 hours. And even without expedited removal, when someone is picked up and taken into custody by ICE, they're often transferred to other states pretty quickly. So you don't necessarily have 1 or 2 days to leave somebody sitting in detention while you find them a lawyer. They might be gone by then, and it's sometimes hard to even find out where they've been transferred. And then you're left trying to find them an attorney in another state. So people should, anyone actually who's not a citizen right now, should make sure they have an immigration attorney on hand. People can call us if they need referrals. We can help out with that. But again, making sure your family and friends have the name of that attorney so that they can act quickly if something happens, if somebody's picked up, because they may not have much time. And it's very concerning that this expedited removal process is being used even for people who may not pose a danger or have any criminal record. The other thing the memo does is instructs DHS to return non-citizens arriving on land from Mexico or Canada, basically back to those countries for removal proceedings, which makes no sense at all, because certainly Mexico and Canada, especially if those people are not citizens of those countries, don't have any obligation to take them, first of all, let alone to detain them. So the memo requires that facilities would be made available for those people to appear for removal proceedings via video teleconference. And it suggests that when they're returned to Mexico or Canada, they would be detained until a removal hearing could be completed, but doesn't explain the process, for this to be accomplished, or how the United States would in any way maintain detention centers in Mexico and Canada. I mean, it just makes no sense. And currently, again, besides the fact that it's nonsensical and we don't know how we're going to have these detention centers in other countries that haven't authorized them, but right now, U.S. law and international treaties require DHS to ensure that people have the opportunity to request asylum or other humanitarian protection. So again, having them immediately deported would affect their ability to request asylum. And again, there's some other stuff in here about asylum applications. It's kind of complicated for the layperson to understand, but it basically is an attempt to make asylum much harder to get, much stronger burden at the initial stage rather than the later stage after the person has had a chance to work with an attorney. The memo also directs ICE and CBP to take all necessary action and allocate all resources to expand detention, again mentioning more detention here, and expanding the short-term detention facilities, which are often used way past the limit. They're supposed to be 72-hour detention facilities, and they're often used for weeks at a time. They're not made for that, not equipped for that, and that's where a lot of the issues come into play with not providing basic necessities like blankets and medical care and things like that. Parole authority has been limited, again, so parole meaning releasing certain arriving aliens once they've established a credible fear for asylum claims, for example. This has also been limited. There's, again, a theme here of detaining people as the kind of default standard rather than the what was previously true of detaining them only in more egregious situations. So it is basically changing that to granting parole only on a case-by-case basis, and it has to be approved by the Deputy Director of ICE or the Deputy Commissioner of CBP, and basically demonstrates an intention to all but eliminate it, except in the most limited circumstances. So the opposite of what was true before. There are additional provisions that talk about unaccompanied minors that are, again, very concerning. Having minors detained in detention facilities, and again, the same issues with inhumane conditions, the same as with detaining anybody else, but certainly we don't want children in those kinds of situations. So,
here's what, let's talk about what people can do, right? So,
right.
If you are, if you are not in agreement with these topics that we have discussed and these measures, one simple way is that we have to, the only way a lot of these things can be achieved, for example, hiring of agents, the building of the wall, the only way all these things can be achieved is there has to be appropriation by Congress for money to build a $21 billion wall, for money to hire possibly over 20,000 people. Now, if you were to put pressure on Congress, write to Congress, call up your congressperson and tell them that you are not okay with this, that may slow this down, or maybe these things will not happen. If there is no money, it cannot happen. But that is the most basic step we all can take. If you're, simply call up Congress and say you don't want, 20,000 more agents, which, by the way, there's a federal freeze right now. So there's a federal freeze right now for all federal government employees, including for essential services. So now here we are hiring 20,000 more people. So that's something people can put pressure on Congress by calling them up and letting them know they're not okay with this.
Right, and the freeze would affect also because they would need more immigration judges as well with all these provisions. And again, not clear how that is affected by the hiring freeze and whether this is exempted. So other things you can do, obviously, protests have been happening everywhere. This is certainly an area you want to keep protesting, keep speaking out, keep spreading the word. But as far as what you can do if you actually know someone who is undocumented, again, the main thing is going to be to make sure that they have legal representation, that they've at least met with an attorney to assess their options. They don't want to wait until they're picked up by ICE. The ICE raids are happening. There's really no indication exactly when or where, but any undocumented immigrant who is picked up is at risk of removal and sometimes immediately, again through that expedited removal provision. So one thing you can do if you witness an ICE raid, because again, there's a lot of people denying that this is even happening. So
Right.
recording it, if your neighbor is raided, if there's a store raided near you, recording it, documenting what's happening, and sharing it. Attending Know Your Rights seminars and sharing that information with people. We do Know Your Rights seminars. There's a lot of groups that do them. We can get a Spanish language translator, so can a lot of other groups. So making sure that you're attending those and sharing that information with anybody affected.
And please let us know if you want us to come and do a Know Your Rights on these issues in your community. Give us a call. Let us know. As Jennifer said, we can get interpreters. That's not an issue in any language, basically.
Right. Arabic, Somali also.
Arabic, Somali, Spanish. So if you know someone or you know a community center, or you just want to have an event and get concerned people, give us a call, and we'll be happy to come and do a Know Your Rights.
Right. And again, reaching out to groups that work on these issues, making sure that you are just staying aware, sharing the information. That's why we wanted to share information today. It gets hard to put all of these things in emails, and people often don't read them. So share this video with people so they have actual information. And we won't do a Know Your Rights now, but just quickly, people need to understand that if ICE knocks on your door, ICE agents or the FBI, and sometimes they come together, nobody's required to open the door unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. So what people in that situation should do is keep the door closed, ask them to leave their business card, and say, my attorney will call you. Nobody's required to talk to ICE unless they have that warrant, and even then, if they have a warrant, you should say, I want to remain silent. The other thing is to make sure that if you are documented, that you've got your for example, your green card with you, that you're carrying that with you.
Which the law mandates you to carry anyway.
Right. So being careful of that, and just basically understanding that anyone is at risk right now. So anybody who's undocumented and has taken this lightly really needs to take it seriously at this point, because they are making it a priority, and it doesn't seem that they are, they're not really having any mercy on anybody. Anybody picked up is at risk at this point. So I think that's it for now. We just wanted to update you quickly on what the memos actually said, because there was a lot of discussion about the leaked memo. And
we'll do another session once the travel ban 2.0 comes out next week.
So next week we'll update you on the Muslim ban. But again, to recap that, green card holders will theoretically be exempt. We still don't have an answer on the immigrant visa holders. So anybody who has an approved immigrant visa should try to travel this weekend, because at least for right now, the stay is still in effect, and anybody with an approved immigrant visa or any other type of visa can travel until a new order is issued. So anybody who needs to travel should do it this weekend. We don't know exactly what's going to happen next week, but we will update you again next week when the new ban is signed, and once we've had the opportunity to read it and analyze it. So I don't know if there's anybody who has questions, but we have like 2 minutes to take any questions.
That's good. We explained everything so well, there are no questions.
No questions. Okay, well, if you have a question, you can email us at jnimmer@cair.com. JNIMER @cair.com. Okay, sorry, we have the iPad sideways. How the individuals who are asylum seekers, okay, so if you've already applied for asylum, I think that's what you mean, those are still being processed right now. So initially when the ban came out, well, and just to clarify, the memos that we were just discussing don't mention anything about currently pending asylum applications. They talk about people who are applying for asylum at the border when they're entering. But as far as the travel ban and for the people from those 7 countries, the pending asylum applications are still going to be processed right now, and any other application for those 7 that is in the United States. So it's still unclear what will happen to immigrant visa applications for people outside the country who have already applied and are from those 7. But anybody inside the U.S. who has any type of application pending, it will continue to be processed. So if you have already applied for asylum, your application will be processed and you should be fine, theoretically.
And the other thing to know here is that TPS has been extended for Somalia. So if you are from Somalia, which is one of the countries covered by the travel ban, you still cannot be sent out, even if you're undocumented, it's because of the TPS.
Right. So, yeah, I think that answers your question, I hope. Okay, if there's no other questions, then we will talk to you guys again next week. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.